everybody. Welcome to the Seacoast Repertory Theater. My name is Tim Hackney. I am the director of the Senior Repertory Theater program here. Senior Repertory Theater has existed in this iteration for the past year. And what you are about to see today is the culmination of our first year of work. Our stories, we have gotten together in a room for the past 8 weeks, and we just discussed life. We talked about our childhoods. We talked about what it was like to grow up in the Cold War. We talked about difficult political moments. We talked about falling in love. We talked about divorce. We talked about anything and everything you could possibly imagine. And these brave people behind me told me their real stories in their own words. And what you're going to see today is the first iteration of the production. The way that these people have learned to talk to each other for the past 8 weeks, disagree about politics, disagree about ideas, disagree about all these things, and still connect with the thing that's deeper underneath is something that our community really, really needs to hear right now. And without further ado, the final performance of our stories.
When a high explosive bomb falls, any building near is likely to be destroyed, and any house hit is sure to collapse. From any post office, you can get a booklet which tells you just how to make your home an air raid shelter.
Wake up, Gillian. My mother was shouting, and then I heard the siren wailing. I knew I had to get out of bed right away, and then my mother would carry me to the dugout shelter at the bottom of the garden. It was 1940, a year after the start of World War II, and I was 3 years old. As we raced down the garden, I saw my father running ahead of us, holding my 7-year-old brother's hand. We all climbed into the dugout and scrambled into our little narrow bunks and pulled down the mosquito netting, and I drifted off to sleep, until suddenly I woke up to hear the all-clear signal. We all breathed a sigh of relief, and my brother and I turned our little cards hanging over our bunks from red to green. Holding our flashlights, we returned to the house for a few more hours of sleep. I remembered to take my Mickey Mouse gas mask with me in case we were woken up again in the night. During the war, we lived in Pinner, Middlesex, which was part of Greater London, where the bombing was most intense. In fact, a German doodlebug had recently fallen from the sky and exploded only 2 miles from our house. The scary thing about those bombs was that as long as you could hear their engines up in the sky, you knew they would not come down on you. If, however, you saw one up there and didn't hear anything, it meant it was about to drop down. The wartime bombing was perhaps the most vivid memory of my childhood. I am still terrified of thunderstorms and cannot easily tolerate guns being waved around on stage. It took me till age 60 to enjoy a fireworks show.
My father died when I was 3. When I was 6, my big brothers went off to fight in World War II. I remember standing by the window by my grandmother who said, "Now wave goodbye to those brave boys," as they went off to boot camp. It was the last time I saw Buddy, who was killed at the Battle of Arnhem in the Netherlands. His twin died just last year at the age of 99, and I made it to his side just in time.
The first 4 years of my life, we lived in an army barracks. And, it was a fire trap. I mean, it was old wooden army barracks that were, not made for apartments. And I can remember big kerosene barrels behind each one of them that were the heat. And you could see through the walls in places. You could hear right through the walls. There were no secrets. You knew exactly what was going on both sides of you. Although I didn't really know what the bed banging was all about at my age. But there were tons of kids. I think when all those fathers got back from the war, there was too much celebrating. So I had lots of playmates. And we kids weren't supposed to go out back, partly the oil barrels, partly the train tracks were right behind the building. And so we were supposed to stay out front. So one day, Johnny Betts had all of us 2 and 3 years old lined up all along the big, long wooden front steps. Johnny was older. He'd already been to school. And so he wanted to teach us what school was like. And so he had us all lined up, and he was going to be the teacher. Well, what did he want to teach us? Dirty words. In the middle of it, my mother came out and said, "Johnny Betts, you get right back upstairs or I'm going to tell your mother." But we didn't know what any of those words meant. Heck, I probably don't even know what half of them mean now.
Bomb scares. Bomb scares.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought
How
you
many
said
of us were
Bob.
crouched in those little wooden desks, waiting
yeah.
for bombs to come,
Duck
in a
cover.
crouched position, and we had to rehearse?
Well, the way it was in the grade school that I went to, they had a special bell that rang, and we had to go running down the steps and get under the stairway.
The whole process was so humiliating. We had a cafeteria we used to hide in, and a line up on the wall and down on our hands and knees with our hands over
Yeah,
our
I think
heads.
humiliating hits it.
And
yes.
we had to wear dresses.
Yeah.
And that was my
Some of
worst
them had crinolines
fear.
underneath them
Yeah.
too,
It was
and so
like
they all
a-
poofed up when
It
you
was
kneeled
like
down.
I felt so degraded and so humiliated.
Yep.
I was more worried about that than this bomb. It
Right.
wasn't particularly real to me, the bomb.
And here I was, a happy, healthy 7-year-old with a brother Mark, who was 2 years younger, another brother Jim, 3 years older, and a sister Joan, who was 6 years older. We lived with our mom and dad in a crowded 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in a blue-collar neighborhood in Toledo, Ohio, overlooking a noisy railroad switchyard right across the street and down a short hill. About a quarter mile further down the hill was the waterfront of the Maumee River, with an old abandoned grain elevator dominating the view. Watching a man delivering ice, block by block, from a truck with an elevator platform on it into the end of a refrigerated railroad car, a boxcar, was a favorite pastime. And I remember it like yesterday, with these great big tongs working off the chunks of ice from the big stack with a nice pick, lifting it up and throwing it into the end of the railroad car. It was not very high tech. Now one day, when I was 7 years old, while I was sitting quietly in that single small bathroom, I'm pretty sure I was on the toilet, reading a Boy's Life magazine, my mom knocked, I think she knocked, and she came in to tell me some news. She said, "We're going to have a baby." I couldn't believe it. And I told her so in a crude and none too polite fashion. Visualize a 7-year-old calling bullshit on his mother. It turned out this was one of 3 additional siblings I gained in the next 4 short years, Joe, Barb, and Worm. Well, Worm was his nickname. His name was really Michael. So we became a family of 9, with kids ranging in age from newborn to 18, all living in this simple 1,700 square foot house. Kind of crowded, huh? With mountains of clean laundry stacked eye-high every day or two waiting to be folded. Having a gas dryer was the key to our survival.
Ice out. Ice out meant only one thing, fishing. I was too little to go by myself. I had to wait for Daddy to take me. My favorite place was Uncle Jack's Marina, and my favorite dock was connected to a building that was sort of like a garage for boats. The bottom was sandy, and the roof of the garage blocked the sun so you could see the fish. One day, as soon after the ice had gone out of the lake as we could, Daddy took my little sister and I fishing. It had been a long winter, and I was so excited. We had to dress really warm in our snowsuits because it was probably April, and it was still very cold. I ran from Daddy's truck as fast as I could and went to my favorite spot by the garage. My sister Patty and Daddy finally caught up with me, and I was sort of impatient because I already needed another piece of hot dog for my book. It was too cold to dig worms, Daddy said. I got a piece of hot dog and put it on my line. And Daddy had to help Patty put her hot dog on her line. So she walked over to put her line in the water, except she just kept walking. She walked right into the lake. And we were sort of surprised because we were used to being in the lake, just not quite that early. So Daddy just walked over into one of the boats and fished her out by her hood and set her on the dock. She was crying. I guess she was cold, and I think maybe she was scared. But then Daddy said we had to go home. I couldn't believe it. We had just gotten there. I was too little. I didn't have a choice. I had to go home. And I was so sad to miss my first day of fishing. I was sure we'd never go again. When we got home and told Mom the story, she was really glad that Daddy had brought Patty home. But I was still mad at her.
I'm 10 years old and in 5th grade. My parents both leave for work early every day, so not only do I have to get myself to school, but I have to get my rented cello there as well. I had chosen to play the cello, an instrument as tall as me and wider, because my parents wanted me to play the flute.
The flute is a good instrument for girls, they said to me. So dainty. These were the same parents who constantly admonished me to sit up straight with my knees together and to stop clomping around the house like an elephant. The cello was as far from the flute as possible. Public school music lessons didn't offer the bass to 5th graders.
My father, ever the inventor, quickly came up with a cello transportation solution. He found a rusty utility cart at the dump, drilled on a plywood platform with a hole in it for the cello's end pin, and furnished a worn strap to hold my cello onto this contraption. Perfect for wheeling your cello to school twice a week, he told me about my new cello cart. Keep in mind, the road to school was anything but flat. We lived in the valley of our street, so already the walk was uphill. But even worse, after a right turn, the road plummeted downward, followed by a seemingly endless uphill climb that caused bicyclists to have to dismount not even halfway up. Since we lived in a family neighborhood, I don't suppose my parents worried about sending me off alone into the early morning chill. So the first day I had my cello, I set off. My friends from the street soon lost patience with me at my slow pace and zoomed on ahead. Onward I trudged, now completely alone. I made it to the end of my street and arrived at the steep downhill section of the road. I froze and looked ahead with dismay. I had just learned all about Sir Isaac Newton and the laws of gravity. How could I restrain my cart and cello from hurtling down the hill without me? What if the cart tipped over on the way down and smashed my cello into bits? Weren't cellos really expensive? Surely the $6.25 I had saved from my allowance would never be enough to pay for a broken cello. While I stood there ruminating over just how hard I had worked to earn that allowance, a big black shiny car with huge fins pulled up to me and stopped. A man wearing a dark sweater, maybe he was a little younger than my father, opened the front passenger door and leaned out. "Need a ride?" he called to me. "Looks like you're going my way. Hop in." Rescue! Without a second thought, I unhitched my cello from its cart and loaded both cello and cart into the back seat. Since there was no room left for me, I climbed into the front seat. The man didn't ask me where I was going, but I figured that was because I was a kid, and where else would I be going besides school? And also, I'm thinking, here's someone who doesn't even know me, and he's offering me a ride to school, which my own parents wouldn't do. This is the best day ever. The man drove in silence, down the steep hill, up the long incline, and past my so-called friends who didn't even look my way. I gloated. I had a ride. When we came to the gravel path, I told the man he could drop me off. "Oh no," he said. It's still too far. "That's okay," I answered. "I always take the path." But he didn't slow down. We made a right turn and then another. I had never been this way, as there was no reason for me ever to walk past the gravel path that led to the school's back entrance. I'm on an exciting adventure to a distant land, I imagined. Well, after we passed a number of small houses, I thought to myself, I bet those parents don't spend all their time working. Those parents probably drive their kids to school, even on sunny days. I glanced over at the man, who silently looked back at me. Does he know what I'm thinking, I wondered, feeling just a tiny bit disloyal. After a couple more minutes, I recognized the front of my school and realized where I was. When we pulled up to the curb, the man said, "You deserve to be driven right to the front of the school with everything that you had to carry." I hopped out, thrilled to be arriving at school before my so-called friends who hadn't even bothered to wait for me. All day at school I grinned. I couldn't wait to go home and tell my parents about my wonderful ride all the way to the school's front door. But when they finally arrived home, and I did tell them, they didn't smile. All they did was look at each other as if I had done something wrong. Sternly, almost harshly, they scolded me. Never, ever accept a ride again from someone you don't know. And just like that, my best experience all week turned into the worst, and I had no idea why.